Thank you all for joining us. My name is Spandon Chakrabarty, and I am one of the founders of People with Empathy, which is the organization that is hosting this panel. And it is also our inaugural panel. Believe it or not, we got started right in the middle of quarantine. So, this is sort of a testament to how much you can do while you're sitting at home and are quarantined, right? And so as an organization, our mission is to break down silos in healthcare and connect stakeholders, so that eventually patients and care partners, their quality of life can improve, right? And a little bit about today's panel. We got actually fairly overwhelming response between platforms. We have over 400 of you signed up to do this. So thank you. And I think we've gotten we covered all the continents except for Antarctica. So so thank you again. And I am going to have the panelists here introduce themselves in a little bit. But we have with us Rashida Gluck, Christine von Rysfeld, and Vij Senthanathan. And we are going to go in that order for introduction. So tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're doing this. Rashida.
Thanks, Spandon. So my name is Rashida Gluck. I'm the head of clinical operations at Aurinia Pharmaceuticals. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry, for over 25 years, specializing in clinical trials, in clinical operations, clinical development. And I started off actually as a registered nurse and moving into being a research nurse and working with patients in clinical trials as I then progressed through the industry in all different areas and functions. And being with clinical trials and learning about clinical trials and working with patients and helping to make a difference is really the reason why I'm here. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to learn about clinical trials, not just from our perspective in the industry, but also from the perspective of the public, and to be able to share knowledge both ways. And today I'm hoping to be able to share some of my knowledge with you and also to gain a little bit more insight from you as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rashida. Christine?
So you all know me, Christine von Rysfeld, one of the co-founders of People with Empathy. And just so you know, these are a series of panel discussions. And what we're trying to do here is spark conversation. We don't have the answers to everything, but we do have different perspectives. We come together and we talk, and we're trying to find solutions based on everybody's perspectives. So we welcome your opinions. We welcome anything that you might have to say. If you have problems or issues, talk about in our chat. We have on our page, we have hopefully Jim and Estella is in there, and who is it? Sorry. Our volunteer, I'm sorry, I haven't met him yet. But they're conducting some conversations in there. So we're going to kind of re-explain the process. I know that this is a scary time for all of us. Clinical trials, we have been out there trying to educate you for so many years, and the landscape has kind of changed. So we want to refresh what is supposed to be happening, kind of talk about the issues we all come up with, and maybe come up with some possible solutions. So that's me, and we'll move on to Vij.
All right, hi Vij.
Hi everyone, I'm Vij Senthanathan, and I currently work for PTC Therapeutics, and I'm in rare disease space since 2014. I started my career in basic research and stem cells and moved to clinical operations as study coordinator. So that's my journey with clinical operations. And over the years, I have become a patient advocate, trying to bring their voice to the table and view it as a pharma and see where we can incorporate those suggestions and work in a very collaborative fashion towards a common mission of getting a drug approved for certain indications. So that's my background. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Vij is also on our board of directors. And I do want to say that Rashida and Vij are, although they're very accomplished in other companies and their fields, they are not here representing the views of their employers, but of themselves personally. So with that, I want to preface this with saying that we got a great deal of questions, you know, from all different kinds of sources. We have tried to, we're going to try to, as we go through this, answer as many of those questions as we can. But if we don't get to your question and you registered and you put a question in, we will get your answer after the event. So with that being said, I want to give Christine a little bit of time to talk about the big elephant in the room, which is COVID-19 and a whole lot of fears and hopes even like circulating around that. So Christine, you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll jump right into what we're supposed to be doing.
Sure, having problems unmuting myself. So we wanted to do this clinical trials process because of everything that's happening with this pandemic. And like I said earlier, we have done some education on the clinical trials process, and unfortunately, some of those processes haven't been followed to the way that we would think that they would need to be. So we'd like to just start some discussions. We know that everybody is scared. I'm a lupus patient, so this is an interesting time for us with our drugs up on the chopping block, to say. And so we kind of just want to explain the process. We want to let you know that as a patient, it is so important for you to participate in clinical trials. You have drugs now that you are using because other people participate in clinical trials. And so we want to kind of change the focus of clinical trials. Clinical trials are not something scary. It's not something to be done at the end of your life. This is something that you can do to help people now. And we cannot solve the problems of any other disease until we tackle COVID and these vaccines. And other trials are kind of, maintenance mode right now. And how do we do this? So we'll talk about this process. We want to get you involved. We want you and healthy people and non-healthy people to participate in these trials going on for COVID. Because once we solve that, we can go back to our regular world and figure out the rest of our diseases. So that being said, we are all terrified. We're scared about what's happening, but we want to find answers and solutions. We want to make you feel comfortable with the process. And we want you to know that as an industry and as a whole, we have people in every different silo who are looking out for you as a patient. So questions, anything you want answered. Industry side, if you have questions on how it's working for a patient, or the clinical side, or even the advertising side, we have people on our team who will help that. And let's, I don't know, let's put COVID to bed and start really focusing on the things that need to be focused on. So that's all I have to say.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Christine. So actually that gives us a great segue into what I want to talk about first, which is why the hell are we doing this? Why do we do clinical trials? Who does it help? Does it help? So let's start with that, Vij. We'll start with Vij, and then we'll go around the panel. But go ahead, Vij.
So before I begin, I want to say at any point in our life, we are going to be a patient. So the first question I will ask myself is, why should I try something that researchers are not sure will work? So that is the first question that will pop in my mind if I get a diagnosis. So being a part of a clinical trial may have risks, but it also has a lot of benefits. And the past clinical trial history has led many to hesitate to sign up for research. But today's rules and the strict laws has been kept in place that your health, privacy, and data are safe. So to me, the benefits of clinical trial is a pathway to a new treatment for a disease before it is available for everyone. And my standard of care gets better because there is a constant interaction with my clinician, the principal investigator, and there may be a chance to help others also get a better treatment. So that is what I feel are the reason for me to participate in a clinical trial, or benefits of a clinical trial is.
Yeah. Rashida, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, clinical trials can be very, very scary. And there are a lot of clinical trials that are out there. But, I'd like to be able to preface that not every single clinical trial is the clinical trial for every person. There is a process that's called informed consent. There is a lot of information that's available to pick the right clinical trial for each person or for any person. And that's really starts with a conversation. It starts with understanding and educating yourself, and maybe sometimes your caregivers, your physicians, your family members on what clinical trials are, what is actually occurring within the clinical trial space, so that if you are interested and you want to learn more, that you can make sure that there is the right clinical trial for you after an informed discussion, after educating, after learning about the process and also about the trial itself, so that it's a little bit less scary.
Yeah. And Christine, you have participated in clinical trials, right? Tell me why you did that. What motivated you?
Okay, so a lot of you know my story, but for those of you who don't, I have several different conditions, rare disease, lupus. And basically as a patient at one point, I really felt like I had no options. And what led me to the clinical trials was the fact that I thought nothing else would help me. Since then, my perspective has changed on clinical trials, and now I believe that it's something that should be done to help other people. And I think what people are missing is that, yes, your clinical trial might help you, but think about the people after you that it's helping. I do clinical trials, and I push clinical trials now because I have nieces that I love. I have family members that show signs of disease, and I want to make sure that what they're getting is the best treatment. And again, we as patients, we sit here and we talk about wanting a cure, but we're not doing anything to help with that cure. The only way we're going to get a cure is if people participate in clinical trials, if they get involved and they give themselves a purpose. So I think the main reason for participating in these clinical trials was to give my life a purpose. I really, as a patient, didn't have much. So it's a purpose, but it's to help everyone else. It's not for me, it's for you, it's for my nieces, it's for anyone after me that doesn't have to go through this and doesn't have to experience the damage or the problems that I've experienced.
So participating is really about paying it forward, right? Somebody at some place did something, and that is allowing a lot of us to live longer lives, more productive lives, feel better throughout our lives. I think about, the HIV/AIDS epidemic that we've lived through, and today it has essentially become a chronic manageable condition, right? That is because a ton of people subjected themselves to clinical trials, not because they were thinking of themselves, but because they're thinking of us, those of us who came after them, right? And that being said, Rashida, you touched a little bit on standard of care, and we got a whole lot of questions around placebo, what it is, what it's not, why should I participate if I just get the placebo? So can you, Rashida, first, and then Vij after that, address the issue of placebos and standard of care really quickly?
So, standard of care is a term that's tossed around, that what it means is what you're usually treated with for whatever condition you have. And that's, that is the standard that is being used to treat you with. Now, not all standard of care is actually approved. For example, as Christine, there isn't actually an approved treatment for lupus nephritis in the US, for example. So standard of care is something that is what generally our healthcare workers, our physicians treat patients with. Now, when you're shifting to something different, you're making a shift. In clinical research and clinical trials, we may actually shift what that standard of care is based on the research, based on the data, based on the results. What was previous, the gold standard, may no longer be it allows for more options, more tools in the tool belt to be able to treat this condition. Placebo is what is used as a comparative, not always, sometimes, depending on the different phases of research, but it's a comparison between your treatment that's being studied and nothing, placebo. It's like people may call it a sugar pill, or you'll hear different terms, vehicle perhaps. And that actually allows, when you're doing research, a comparison. Is your treatment working compared to placebo? Is it working or is it not working? So that when you're looking at your data, when you're looking at your results, you're able to get, a clear answer. So placebos are very, very important in clinical trials, but not all clinical trials have placebos. And that's also, as I had mentioned earlier, it's part of, learning and educating about the different clinical trials, because not every single clinical trial is for every person. And placebos can definitely be a part of it, but not necessarily guaranteed to be a part of it.
And Rashida, just to play on that really quick, and people have to realize too, clinical trials are not always drugs. There are clinical trials that are devices. There's a million things that you can do, studies. So don't take clinical trials as specifically drugs. If you're not into trying these drugs, there are other ways to participate and help others. So just wanted to put it out there that it's not all drugs, because that makes it so scary for people,
Good.
Yeah, so I think Rashida covered all the key points on the placebo arm and the drug arm, which I also want to add that there is something called natural history data, where we also compare, and in that case, most of the participants all the participants can get the study drug. So it depends case by case basis, but the common factor that everybody has is how is the safety of the participants protected in this trial? And that is what I feel is the pulse of most of the questions we received were around it. So that's a very important question. And the history of clinical research is not perfect. And I feel over the years, the Congress has passed laws to protect study participants. So every clinical investigator is required to monitor and make sure every participant is safe. So in that way, if you're on a placebo arm or on a treatment arm, I feel you have better access to your physician and you meet him quite often, and the standard of care gets better. And there is IRB who reviews you with, the study doctors are more responsible to provide you better care and make sure throughout the journey you're safe and your data is protected. So that's something to keep in mind for every participant if you think about participating in a trial, whether it's placebo or a drug arm.
Right. So, I mean, to simplify it, just right down to placebo is not you get nothing. You get, you're just left to rot. It is standard of care plus a sugar pill versus standard of care plus the compound or the treatment that is that we're trying to figure out whether it is effective or not, right? What is IRB, Viz? You just said IRB.
Yes, so it's an institutional review board. So every study site must approve, every study site must approve every clinical trial in the United States. And they are made of team of doctors, scientists, and lay people like you and me. They are dedicated to making sure that the study participants are not exposed to unnecessary risk. So that's the purpose of IRB. And we have to go through IRB to establish the site and get approval to even initiate giving a drug to a patient. So IRB plays a very important role. And it's site specific and it works with the PI and the sponsor. So that's how it works in a nutshell.
Great. Perfect. So this actually leads us fairly nicely into the process of how clinical trials are conducted, right? So Vid and Rashida, I think I'll start with Vid. Go through for us quickly about how the process starts, what it's like, and when do we get to human beings?
Right. So I'll just wrap it up in 30 seconds because it's really the target discovery. As a pharma company, they spend quite a good amount of time on identifying your target, the target validation, and they finally come up with your lead compound. Like let's say it's X is the lead compound. And the X compound goes to a preclinical development where in vivo, in vitro studies, animal model studies are done, toxicology studies are done. Once the dosing of that target compound is identified, that's where we enter into the human trial, which is the phase 1, done in healthy volunteers. And then you proceed to phase 2, which is a proof of concept to see the safety profile of your compound, like side effects of your compound, and the dosing regimen, like how much to dose, and efficacy endpoint. For instance, you might want to see in a particular population, does the ability to walk for a certain period is done. Those are called the efficacy endpoint. And phase 3 is your actual approval, where you do little more, like, from 100 healthy volunteers to phase 2 of 100 to 500. And phase 3 is generally 1,000 to 5,000 patients. And that's the data you submit to FDA for an approval. So this is in a nutshell what happened.
Right. So Rashida, then talk to us a little bit about who are all these people that's doing this, starting with the most important, of course, the patient.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at it in phase 1, as we're starting, patients are integral throughout the entire life cycle of clinical trials, regardless of which phase. And it's the same thing. You have your IRB, as Vijay has mentioned. Now, one thing that's really important when you're looking at all of the different phases of clinical research, it's really critical to understand that you cannot move from phase 1 to phase 2, from phase 2 to phase 3, until each phase is reviewed and approved by the FDA. It's reviewed and approved before you start any clinical trial by ethics boards. So there is a tremendous amount of oversight and accountability and responsibility to make sure that the protocol, the study that's being conducted at whatever phase, ultimately protects the rights and safety and well-being of individuals. So the patient is by far the most critical part of that clinical trial process. So, what are the responsibilities of a patient coming into clinical trials? One is to be present, to be, following the clinical trial protocol, engaging, communicating, being honest with the clinical trial site, and being an active participant in the clinical trial. Phase 1 is where we're talking about healthy volunteers. The purpose of that is to look at what we call ADME, how the compound is absorbed, how it's distributed, how it's metabolized, how it's excreted in the human body. So you look at a healthy volunteer. And then as you progress through the different phases of clinical research, your phase 2, you have people who have the disease that you're studying. So patients coming in with the disease, but may not have other health issues. And then when you're moving into phase 3, you have patients that are coming into your phase study, but they have your disease that's being studied, but they also may have other, what we call comorbidities, or other diseases, chronic diseases as well, because, hey, that's life. People aren't walking around sometimes with just one disease. They may have multiple health issues, and that's the real world. And so it's very important, regardless, throughout each phase, that the patient is the central integral part of the equation in clinical trials.
And Spandon, I just want to add something about the timeline, which I didn't mention, is when we do this target discovery or identifying your target compound, we are looking at 1 to 3 years to get there. And the preclinical development about 1 to 1.5 years. And then the clinical trials takes 6 to 7 years. So this is the timeline we are talking about. And each phase has this different amount of dollar amount involved in it, like target discovery, and the R&D phase is about around 200 million, around that. Then when you get into the preclinical development, the stat says is like 122 million. And when you run the actual clinical trial for 6 to 7 years from phase 1 to phase 3 until approval is $1 to $2.5 billion. So this is the rough estimate of what you're looking and the time frame for a drug to be out in the market.
And what's very important, as Vij is mentioning, with that cost, what we have to remember, that is a linear approach.
If
A
everything
clinical trial, a development process or program could stop at any point in time for whatever reason, and that cost is lost, it's gone. So, not every single compound makes its way from the bench through to the bedside. There's so many molecules and compounds and research that occurs that will never ever find its way in a clinical trial to a human. And, not even to a phase 3, maybe not even to phase 1. So it's not really a linear approach. And it is an extremely expensive process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also about
Sorry.
I just wanted to add to what Rashida said about the participants. Like, the study volunteers play a very important role in the trial, and they are what that make research happen. So they're equal stakeholders, and that's the conversation we want to evoke through this panel. Think about it as an equal partnership with pharma and patients and the PI.
Right. And these study volunteers, they have a great deal of power in the process, right? And when we say they should be empowered, it isn't just that they should feel good about it. They should know that they have a great deal of controlling what they do, great power over the process, and with great power comes great responsibility, right? So, Christine, I want to. Rashida and Vij both talked a little bit about, how much it costs, linear cost versus, when developments just stop. And we know a lot that recruitment is still an issue, right? Especially for recruitment, diverse participants in a trial, right? So and I want all three of you to talk about it. We want to talk about why recruitment is such an issue, but first, why is it so important that we get all different kinds of people to participate in trials? Christine, start with you, and then I'll move to Rashida and Vij.
Okay, so you just made that like 8 different questions. But you
answer
answer 4 of them. You started out, I want to first tell patients that, again, you have a responsibility here. I hear from a lot of people that patients come in and they want things done. They want clinical trials. They want a cure, but they're not willing to participate in clinical trials. So what I want to say first is, you had said this brings great responsibility, and these clinical trials need you as not only as a participant, but as a vested member of this whole process. There are things that you need to do. There's research that you need to do on your own. So what I want to tell patients first off is you are the only person in control of your life. You are the only one that control your outcome. So what happens in your life, you need to take initiative. If you want to help find a cure, you need to involve yourself in clinical trials. You need to talk about the process, and you need to do your own research, because people will come at you from every different angle, but it may not be right for you. So what I'm saying for patients mainly in this whole space is you have to know that this is a responsibility. Our pharmaceuticals, that this is their job, right? But it's also our job as patients. And I think we need to consider that and to know that we're not here looking for answers. We're here to help find the answer. So get involved. I don't know where the whole question went, because it kind of went from one extreme to another, and we started out on the whole patients, what they need to do. But for me and for every patient out there, you need to do your research. You need to know that people aren't looking out for you. They don't read your minds. They cannot monitor you 24 hours a day. So you have to take some responsibility in this process. And as patients, we need to stop yelling that we need a cure and start participating in this process. So I don't know how you ended it, but I'm
Well, I
open to
wanted
any type
to-
of conversation, but don't know where that was going.
All right. So then, Rashida, I want you to pick up on this as to, we were talking about, clinical trials and the patient important, recruitment, cost, and the loss. Why is it that recruitment is from industry point of view such a hard sell still? And just start with that.
Recruitment is probably the #1 issues that I think anybody in industry faces when we talk about clinical trials. And when we talk about the rare disease space, it's even more difficult and it's even more important. You can't get a clinical trial, you can't get data, you can't do research without having patients, without having people who have the disease that you're studying or that you're researching participate. And recruiting people into clinical trials is extremely critical, and it's extremely important, and it's extremely difficult. But I think the reason why is because there is, it's very scary. We started off this conversation saying, clinical trials is scary. What does it mean? Being educated on clinical trials, on options, is something that falls onto, yourself as a patient, perhaps, onto your physician, onto a clinical trial site. All of that, all is part of recruitment. And, recruitment is so critical and it's so important because without recruitment, we can't go through a clinical trial. And I think, Spandon, previously, you were talking about diversity in recruitment and in clinical trials and what that all means. It's very, very important to make sure that when you're looking at a clinical trial or when you're looking at a disease area, the type of individuals, the type of population that you want to or need to recruit into your clinical trial has to reflect that population, that demographic of that disease area. So if you have a disease area that is made up mostly of women of, Hispanic descent, or, you need to make sure that for your clinical trials that you can't have Caucasian men just in your clinical trial, because that's not really the population that has the disease in general. So, that also adds a little bit of complexity to clinical trials and to recruitment. So it is very, very complex. It is absolutely critical. And I wish I had, the magic answer to recruitment, but I don't. I'd love to hear more thoughts around it and how we can be successful as a whole. But it will continue to be a challenge, and it is an extremely important challenge, because at the end of the day, it means that we are recruiting people, right? And so that is important.
Can I touch on that for a second with the recruitment? And I'll tell you as a patient what I think the major problem is in recruitment is trust. So you have an industry that is very focused on profits, and you have patients who are giving their blood, sweat, and tears and getting maybe a $25 Amazon gift card for their time. They're not getting trial results. They're not getting really any contact, and they're kind of left wavering on what their options are, and they're scared. And people in industry don't always talk to patients in a way that they should. And that's not to say that, that they don't like them or whatever, but there's technical terms that you guys use that I've learned them, but a lot of these patients don't know. So I think first is your trust. I think, getting into these communities, a lot of these communities, we talk about the money that it takes. You also talk about how much you put into a drug, and if it doesn't work, okay. But then you also have companies that abandon these communities when it doesn't work. And here you were in there saying, we're here to help you. This drug didn't work, goodbye. So how do you change that? And then my other thought is, we have a whole untapped workforce of these amazing people who are empowered, who know the clinical trial process, who have been through it. Why not utilize these people? Why not take their perspective, give them jobs, give them a purpose, give them something to do, and change the whole face of clinical trials by really involving patients, you know, and not making them a dollar figure or I'm a return of income or I'm de-identified data. I am now an equal stakeholder in this whole process. So for me,
a very, very, very interesting, you know, paradigm shift, you know, if you will. And I think something that, you know, there is a lot of misunderstanding around that. And one thing that, you know, I'll touch on, and Viz, you can add to this, you know, is the concept here of paying patients to participate in clinical trials. That's a tough one. That really, really is. Remember that every single clinical trial is overseen by an ethics board. Trust me, I understand when it is really difficult to be able to have these clinical trials where you have a protocol and you have 15 visits that patients need to come in, you know, every month, or, you know, have poked multiple times to draw blood. And yet I can't give you $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 or $500 sometimes to participate. Why? Because there's a fine line between what's considered appropriate and what's considered potentially coercive. We want people to come into clinical trials who want to be in, not to come in for, you know, because they're getting paid. And all of that has to be approved and reviewed by the ethics board, because it's the decision or not the decision, it's the responsibility of the ethics board to protect the safety and the rights of individuals. So there are different things that you can do. You can try as a sponsor, as an industry, to make things a little bit easier. Yeah, maybe we can't give you, you know, what your time is absolutely worth, but we can maybe make it a little bit easier. Maybe we can provide childcare for the moms who are single and, you know, have no place to, you know, leave their kids while they're at the doctor's office. Or maybe we can do something else and provide, you know, some transportation assistance, or, you know, things like that. But remembering every single piece of that, again, has to be reviewed and approved by an ethics board before we put it in place. But it is absolutely critical. Absolutely. It's so important.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Rashida was saying, like everything has to be justified. Even if you're giving a tote bag to carry the study medication back home, IRB or the ethics committee wants a reason why are you giving that. So we have to be very careful as we maneuver how we are going to support the patient community. As Rashida said, we are getting creative around transportation, childcare, if there's a single mom who wants to be on a study. So even as a pharma, I feel since Christine listed her laundry list of stuff, like as a patient, how she felt, I think this is also a learning from the industry point of view, how to make sure patients are full and equally informed about the different process of the study and where they stand at different phases of their visit. And I think my learning is like maybe the study coordinator has to be trained better to communicate those key information to the patient so they complete the loop. Because as a sponsor, we don't talk to the patient directly. Study site is our medium through which we talk. And the PI, as Christine was mentioning, they're extremely busy. So the site we have to get creative around how to inform the patient through the sites, give them additional support staff, or those are things as a sponsor we can start thinking and better engage these communities very early on, even before we have like a phase 1 starting. That way you build that trust, then they know we are all working together for a drug for this particular indication. So those are my 2 points in a nutshell as an industry or as a sponsor.
And you guys know that I don't, you know, I know all the restrictions. I'm just saying these are major concerns for patients and they're things that need to be brought up. So I do understand, you know, your side of it, obviously, but, you know, these are the things that people are saying.
I think it's really important for industry to hear I mean, it works absolutely both ways, because to be able to understand what patients are going through and the ways that you can actually make things a little bit easier or more helpful, you know, is absolutely critical for industry, for sponsors. And that message needs to be heard. That message needs to be delivered. The best way to do it, I don't know, I guess through platforms like this, right? But you're absolutely right. We need to be able to hear it and take it into consideration and work with people, you know, on an equal basis.
I think one of the things I want to bring up too is, you know, I go to all these different conferences and we have different sides and different silos saying each person, this isn't their responsibility. You know, you have, you know, sites and you have CROs saying this is the doctor's responsibility. And then you have doctors saying this isn't my responsibility. So, you know, how do we do this where everybody is informed? And I do think, you know, people keep talking about how do we get into these communities? How do we get into these diversified, you know, everything? And again, you have all of these people in these spaces, employ these people. You don't have to pay them for this study, but maybe give these people a job as, you know, like I know that Lupus has I forgot what it's called, and sorry, it's early morning, but like a program where it's a PALS program. I think that's what it's called. It's a PALS program where you walk another person through a clinical trial process. You hire all of these people in industry to walk people through clinical trials who don't even know how to talk to them. So that right there to me is a waste of money. And I don't know about you guys or what you think, but I think employing someone, employing a patient who's been through a clinical trial, educating them, being that liaison between the community, you're now not taking up the doctor's time. You're not setting up a whole new division of something, and you have people who know how to talk to these people. And a lot less money than what you're spending on these experts that come in and aren't really experts. But that's my 2 cents. Sorry, I'll stop.
That's pretty good. No, this is why we're having this, right? Because we want to be able to be transparent, and we want to be able to, the community side and the industry side need to be able to tell each other the truths, and even when they're hard truths, right? And I think that is sort of how we get to improvement. We did get some questions right around this money in funding and do sponsors, you know, fund specifically, what kind of recruitment efforts do specific sponsors fund, or do they just leave it up to the trial site? So talk a little bit, Vij and Rashida, what is the difference between a sponsor and a study site? And do sponsors fund specifically, you know, other than just giving them a block of money, the study site, specifically recruitment efforts in specific communities? So I think we'll start with Vij this time.
Oh, thank you, Spandon. I was like, first. So as a sponsor, as I mentioned, some of the bigger pharma have a patient advocacy group in-house, like within the company, and they develop relationship with various advocacy groups across the US or EU and rest of the world. So we kind of engage them from the early on, letting them know there is a trial coming and we see there is a benefit for this population. So it is about engaging the community, the patient community, through our PAG groups. And also, if you work for a smaller pharma, there are CROs who help you build those relationships with the patient community. And since I'm in rare disease space, I can say most of the principal investigators are the main source of our contact with the patients, because they've been seeing these pediatric populations or the adult rare disease population for quite some time, and they recommend them to be on the trial. So this is how pharma is approaching as of now. So I'll let Rashida add something to that.
No, I agree. You know, in general, you know, what's the difference between a sponsor and, you know, a study site? A sponsor is the group that actually funds the clinical trials, right? They're the ones that are doing the research, that are collecting the data and ultimately getting the results and submitting it for review. And the sponsor is also responsible to select the study sites. The study sites or where the clinical trial is actually being conducted, you know, with the physicians at different hospitals, private clinics, and the study site usually, as Vijay said, bring in their own patients perhaps, or they advertise directly for patients, or they advertise their clinical trials. Sometimes different institutions have, or academic centers or hospitals, or even sites, private sites, have multiple clinical trials going on that they advertise for. So these are, you know, the study sites, and it isn't unusual, depending on the size or budget for a sponsor, to also do different types of recruitment programs. They may be funding recruitment programs through external vendors or through advocacy groups. And again, any type of funding or any kind of advertising that they do for recruitment also has to be reviewed and approved through the ethics boards to make sure that, you know, the message is true, it's accurate, that the risks and the benefits potentially are, you know, communicated appropriately. So I think that answers some of your questions, Ben. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Expanding really quick.
So
Expanding really
Kristen,
quick. You
go ahead.
talked about buckets of money. And I just want to say, if anyone wants to throw those buckets of money towards us, we're just starting. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Just want to throw it in there.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone who has buckets of money, you're very welcome. But okay, so we just talked about what these specific relationships are, and I want to then talk next. Talk next about the importance of, and Christine touched on this, is trust, right? So if you can't necessarily pay patients $2,000, or and everything has to go, I want you to then talk about how do you build long-term trust, right? Because we have way too often, right? You know, somebody comes in, and Christian and I have both come from patient advocacy backgrounds, right? Like we have companies oftentimes come and say, hey, I need 135 patients who meet these criteria within this amount of time. And oftentimes we either never have heard of them before, or we will never hear from them again, right? So how do you make these, give me your thoughts on how do you make these long-term investments? I think we'll go Rashida, Vij, and then Christine, because I think she has a lot of insights on this that you can tie it up at the end. So Rashida, you start.
Yeah, trust is you know, absolutely critical, and I think it's always in anything, right? The hardest thing to build and easiest thing to break, right? You can take a lifetime to build it and a second to destroy it. I think building trust it starts at the very beginning, and it's a little bit different for industry as it is for sites, because remembering that barrier that industry has, we can't go straight out to patients directly, but we can work through different agents like advocacy groups or like sites. And really, to me, it's building trust is really just kind of doing the right thing. You know, we really need to do the right thing, and that's the right thing for patients. It's also the right thing for the study, and it's also the right thing ultimately for the whole entire process, because if we get the right study and we get the right patients, then ultimately, hopefully, we will get the right treatment where everybody will win at the end. But that is always having to be built upon trust. And I think if we just step back and say, look, we need to just do the right thing by our patients, we need to do the right thing for our clinical trial, we need to do the right thing by our sites as well. That's the basis for building trust.
Vij?
Yeah, it's the same thing was Rashida was pointing out. It's building this trust very early on, not just when we need this 120 patients, we come to the PAGs, but engaging them from the beginning, or basic information about what clinical trials are is what is needed at this moment. Starting from there, educating the people and creating awareness around clinical trials can lead to the next step of they being interested to know more about this particular trial, and that can help with some enrollment. So that's how I see the approach, like engaging them very early on, not just your disease population, but everybody as such, because as I started my talk, like I said, at any point in life, any of us can be a patient. So it's something that all of us should start thinking post COVID-19, because things are going to change after this. There's going to be more virtual trials. When we do that, we rely on the patient to be the data collectors. So we want a committed, accountable, and compliant patient network to be in those trials. So it's going to be like a domino effect. This will lead to the next step, and that will lead to more of virtual trials. So it is engaging and creating awareness to the patients about clinical trials will be my starting point to engage and interact with them.
And Christine, what is your advice to the industry people on how they build and focus a little bit on longer term trust, right?
Yeah, no, totally. So if you see me speak anywhere, and anyone can tell you that my whole focus is being in these communities. Do not step into these communities, build them and stay with them from the beginning to the end. If your drug does not work, stay with this community, because you're going to need them again. And once you've already burned them, you cannot come back and ask them for something. What I think with the trust, we talk about trust, but there's trust with everyone, right? You have these, they're expecting trust, but there's no conversation, right? There's no transparency. There's not even any patients at the table. I go to these conferences and there's 10 of us that speak at these conferences. You have patient centricity experts who know nothing about patients speaking on the topic. So I think it's, trusting involves being transparent, telling people, and being transparent, not just with patients, but with every other part of industry. You have a million companies working on the same things that don't know they're working on the same things. And maybe your idea is just missing one little piece. And that company, that other company that you think is your competitor, has that answer. So I don't know. I think the trust is about coming in, sticking there, staying with them, and not abandoning people. You have people that participate in clinical trials that can't even get the drug once it's approved. So look at this from different perspectives. I understand with industry, this is your job, but your job is our lives. And so somehow involve these patients, involve them in, a lot of them have valid, opinions and perspectives, and they're not being heard because we're being looked at as patients. So if you want to start with trust, come in our communities, talk to us, involve us, engage us, and then don't walk out when it doesn't work out for you.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
That's mine.
And,
2 cents. I could go on and on, but I'm not.
And as we get towards the last sort of 7 minutes of this conversation, I want to focus on two big trust issues. One of the things Christine just touched on, which is that if it doesn't work, if it doesn't get approved or what have you, oftentimes it's hard for participants to find out, well, what happened? Did I get the placebo? Did I get the drug? Did I get the compound? Where do they find that out? Who is responsible for posting these results? So talk about that first, and then I'll go into the next question. Rashida.
Yes, so that's also a very, very important question. So we're in one of the most regulated industries, right? So it is actually a requirement to post results. We have to post our results, whether they met the primary endpoint or whether they didn't meet the primary endpoint. Usually where these results are posted are on a database, clinicaltrials.gov. Not a lot of people, the public, may not be aware of clinicaltrials.gov. It's a database of all of the different clinical trials that are being done globally in the US, and their results once the studies complete. Now, it doesn't happen in an instant. It doesn't happen as soon as the results or the study's finished that you will see the results next week. There is a process, there is a review process that takes place, and that these results will ultimately get posted. That is from a study level, and that's the sponsor's responsibility to do. From a level in terms of the clinical trial for a patient, did you have placebo? Did you have treatment? That is the responsibility of the site, because the results of that level goes to the clinical study site once the study is done. Again, not the week following a study. There is a process and there is a timeline, but the study doctor will have those results, and they will be the ones that will be able to share it with their patients.
Right. Vitch?
Yeah, it's as Rashida was mentioning, like as a patient, if I'm completing a trial, I expect my principal investigator to close the loop and tell me how the results were. He also has access to know whether you're on the placebo arm or on the study arm, just for you to understand how you reacted to a particular disease. Was it disease progression, or the drug really worked for me? So at the first level of your contact as a patient will be to your principal investigator to ask him about what is the next stages of the trial. And as Rashida mentioned, when a sponsor closes a study, there is a series of steps that needs to be done. We have to clean up the data and write a clinical study report out of it. So that takes its time. And once that's done, it gets updated in clinicaltrials.gov. And as a patient, my source, any trial listed in clinicaltrial.gov will be your, that's the only thing I would trust as a patient. And I would not participate in any trial that's going to pay me so much thousands of dollars, because that doesn't work that way. So these are my two, if something doesn't look right, those are the red flags to know if it's not in ct.gov, or there is a lot of money involved to participate in a trial, then I would consider participating in it. So that's something I want to flag it to the entire audience here.
Right. Okay. And I think we're coming pretty close to the end. Christine, did you want to?
I'm back, right? You lost me for a second.
Yes, we lost you for a second.
Middle of Silicon Valley, and I am always the one that gets dropped or lost. I missed a little bit, but I know you guys covered everything. I want to say, I was looking in the chat room. I see all of your comments. There's some amazing comments and questions. Again, I don't think people should be paid to be in the trial. I want to just say that's a perspective that we need to look at and think about. And I'm seeing the conversation. I'm excited about the conversation that's happening there. And I just want to let you all know that this is the first of a series of sessions. And so we are going to be going on about different topics, but we will be answering questions. If you have any questions, let us know. But again, like from my patient perspective, get us involved. You have educated patients out there, and the patients that aren't so educated, you also need to be out there and doing your research, educating yourself. You have a purpose, you have value in this process, and make sure that you are known. So I think that as a whole, patients need to step in together and kind of educate themselves, educate each other, and make sure our voices are heard, but done in the right way, right? In a way that is not going to come in demanding answers, but we need a seat at the table. We need to be part of the conversation, and not an angry part of the conversation, but just a part of the conversation.
That's right. So at the end, I know, and I want to say to our audience who's been online, I've seen you're sending in questions. We did not get to a lot of them, but I want you guys to sort of close this loop around the issue of participation and trust, and having these two, industry side and patient side, because we got a really important question. I know it's kind of like going off on a tangent, but I want to mention it because the question was around, hey, well, how do I know that this is the standard of care if the company is just pushing its own care? So I think it's not clear to a lot of people exactly who decides what standard of care is. And I don't think the sponsor does that, right? So talk about that a little bit, and then any concluding remarks that you have. And this one we will go Vidge, Rashida, and then Christine.
Sure. So that's a great question, because as a sponsor, when we work on a protocol design, we get in the feedback from the FDA. Like, we want to look at the EEG, EKG. It just depends on the indication. And we have to look at those parameters or the test that needs to be done to check the safety of the patient. So when you go to a regular doctor, they will do your physical exam, temperature, pulse ox, but sometimes you may not even get an EKG or EEG done. So when you're part of a study clinical trial, we do a safety lab, EKG, EEG, or any other additional like an MRI scan. So that is what I mean as a standard of care. So you have better tools to, like collecting your medical chart. So that's how we plan our study design. So that's the standard of care I'm referring to. And I want Rashida to add to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, what's really important and who determines, the treatment, the standard of care for treating a particular disease area, it's your doctor. Every single clinical trial has inclusion and exclusion criteria. It is up to your physician, your study doctor, to determine, do you fit that inclusion and exclusion criteria? Is this study the right one for you? Would you potentially be better off with a different treatment? Or should you try to potentially take this clinical study as an option? That's conversation that every single person who's considering clinical trials must have with their doctor, whether it's their study doctor or whether it's their regular primary care physician that is going to refer them to a study. That is where the determination of standard of care and what's best for the patient really comes, where it stems from. It's not the sponsor's responsibility or ability even to determine if that patient will fit that clinical trial. It really is a conversation with the patient and their doctor.
All right. Christine, do you want to say some concluding remarks before
we
conclude?
Before we conclude, I have a million remarks to say, but I'm not going to say them all here. If you want to hear them, you can email us and we'll talk to you later. I do really just want to thank everyone, because this was our inaugural event. I mean, we started this nonprofit in the middle of a pandemic a month and a half ago. And the response that we have gotten is amazing. And I want to say, I've been doing a lot of work in the industry as a volunteer for several years and worked with many of these companies. And I want to say thank you to all of them for supporting me and pushing this through. I mean, we had Aurinia shared at PTC, Therapeutics shared at Spencer Health. We had everybody, patients like me, had it out there. So I just want to say this was amazing. And to see over 300 of you involved and the conversation that's going on these sites is amazing. So I hope to continue that with our series coming up. We're going to be touching on everything from data, precision medicine, pharmacogenomics, whatever it is. And we're going to be involving the opinions of all stakeholders. So if you want to get involved and to be part of our conversation, let us know, join us. What we're missing is empathy. And thankfully, we decided to buy the link 2 years ago, and it came in handy. So thank you, Spandon, for everything and putting this together and dealing with me, because everybody knows I don't shut up, and keeping this on time. So thank you.
Yeah,
all.
we are
overwhelming.
Yeah, we are pretty well on time. I did want to thank you, Rashida, for your time. Thank you, Vidge, for being here and helping us. I hope that for people who have been watching, it's a little bit clearer to you if you're looking for what the process is. I hope that's a little bit clearer to you. If you were looking for what is the community thinking, I hope that is a little bit clearer to you. This is not the end of this conversation. We are going to keep having conversations about medicine, about clinical trials. So please get in touch with us, peoplewithempathy.org. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, obviously, because you're watching it on Facebook. So,
And I do want to say too, Rashida and Vij, you didn't have to do this. They did this out of the kindness of their heart. There is no monetary exchange here. This is
That's
just friends having a conversation. So Rashida, thank you. Vij, thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined us. And if you're watching this later, then thank you to you. And if you signed up, you will get some post-event goodies. Well, not things. We're not going to send you a Starbucks gift card, but
We don't have money.
you'll get some info from us. So thank you again. Thank you to everybody. And I think that concludes our first virtual panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.